You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 30th of September 2021 on Monocle 24. The Briefing is brought to you in association with Novartis. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Tom Edwards. Coming up on today's programme,
we have a commitment to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act, a bipartisan commitment to make sure that Taiwan has the ability to defend itself and to make sure that we're sustaining peace and security in the Western Pacific.
The US State Department has committed to help Taiwan defend its territory, but is Washington also preparing to pave the way for Taipei's participation on the international stage? Plus, Portugal's vaccine programme races ahead of its competitors. We review the day's business headlines, and Fernando Augusto Pacheco will be here with his global countdown. Faye, is it a top 5 or more of a top 007 today?
Well, I think you're giving all the spoilers, Stone, and let's remind you, my name is Pacheco, Fernando Pacheco. Of course, we're looking at the best tunes of the most amazing franchise in cinemas.
All that and more ahead here on The Briefing with me, Tom Edwards. A senior US official has said that Washington, D.C. remains committed to expanding Taiwan's participation on the global stage. China, which claims Taiwan as its own territory, prevents the self-ruled island from participating at leading international get-togethers, the UN in New York or the WHO in Geneva. But does the latest mood music from the White House suggest that could be about to change? Well, let's explore this further now with David Schlesinger, an independent advisor and commentator on China. In a previous life, David was editor-in-chief of Reuters and also served as the news agency's bureau chief in both Taipei and Beijing. I think I'm right in saying. You are. David, great to have you with us in the studio. We heard Blinken at the top of the show there explaining the position, but maybe we can backtrack a little and you can remind us, what's the formal diplomatic position of the US when it comes to Taiwan status?
There is only one China. The U.S. agreed to that when it set up relations with Beijing. But in that, the U.S. has kept friendship with Taiwan, and it is the U.S. is really very much part of that whole idea of let's push this problem down the road. Let us not deal with the question of what one China really means. And that has served the world well for six decades or so. In fact, Taiwan and China also signed up to something that was called the 1992 Consensus. Now there's a lot of disagreement about what that actually was, but it basically seemed to say, yeah, we both agree there's only one China, but we agree that there are different interpretations of what that might mean. So it's an ambiguous grey area.
Often very useful, of course, when doing international diplomacy. What about the view of the global community? Rather hard to characterise, of course, but I just mean this sense that Taiwan, I read a thing, I think, from one of the Taiwanese delegations saying the exclusion from the UN and other institutions is unjust. That is a view that a lot of people share, right, wherever we look in the world.
I think you can put the UN to one side. If you think that there is only one China, if you buy that line, that ambiguous line, well, then only one person can sit in that chair at one time. So let's put the UN to one side. I think the unjustness is around things like the WHO, the World Health Organization, in a time of COVID, when I think the people of Taiwan really have suffered from not being part of the international scientific community. They have not suffered from the free flow of research, from participating in that, and they've suffered from not getting easy access to the vaccines. It's been quite difficult for them. So when it comes to a purely scientific humanitarian organization, I think using the word unjust is right, is justified. When it comes to things that are more diplomatic or certainly military, I think you could probably put those to one side. In trade organizations, Taiwan does participate in a sense. It's part of the World Trade Organization in a very convoluted name. I think it's called the Special Customs Region of Taiwan, Penghu, and Mazu. And it's in APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation group, in a similar formulation. But that's it. And it's very quite interesting. In the past week, both China and Taiwan have indicated they want to join the new trade organization that's being formed with a really horrible name of CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a horrible name, but it has the potential for being a very large and influential bloc. Both have said they want to sign up. Probably neither will get a chance to do so.
Gold star for your acronym work there, David. Very good. It's not easy to keep on top of these. So what does the US State Department then have in mind when it uses a phrase like, we're committed to helping Taiwan to expand its international space? Again, it's a slightly nebulous concept, but by that, do they mean we're talking more about trade agreements or trade organisations rather than, the UN, which, as you said, we kind of need to park?
I think it's a wonderful expression, to expand international space, because it can mean everything and nothing at the same time. If I would have to guess, I would say that it probably means getting some kind of status in the World Health Organization, because that really has stood out during the COVID time. It's not good for Taiwan. It's not good for the world to have a place with 20 million people cut out from that. And it might signal a potential deal around this CPTPP. The U.S. is not part of it, but the two NAFTA partners of Canada and Mexico are. So the U.S. certainly has influence there. It might signal a potential deal.
And David, I was going to ask you, one thing I was going to ask you was about the prospects of a seat at the UN one day. I think we can agree that's probably not going to happen. And that's notwithstanding the fact that China's a permanent member of the Security Council. That seems improbable in any case. What about other moves that you think could be plausible? Is that WHO membership something that can be realised? And if so, what does it take to get there? Are there other key stakeholders elsewhere in the world who need to engage or re-engage with this issue in order to drive even something like that forward?
I think I would take a step. Excuse me. I think I would take a step back and say what really needs to happen is to de-escalate some of the tensions that we have in the region. Excuse me for that. And I think we have seen this new tie-up between Australia, the UK, and the US for nuclear-powered submarines, which has certainly angered China. We've seen the UK sending a warship through the Taiwan Straits just in the past few days. And the people in Beijing can look at maps just the way you and I can and say, what possible reason does the UK have to be a player in the Taiwan Straits? And the answer is none. But that is an escalation of tension. It is a sign that there is an Anglo-Saxon alliance against China. It is a sign that there is a sort of new Cold War forming. So I think a de-escalation on all sides is needed. And then you can talk about, perhaps we can find some fancy name formulation. We can find an observer status. We can find ways of getting Taiwan more involved in international organizations.
David, it's absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for coming to share some insights with us. That was David Schlesinger joining us on the programme. Right now, as the clock ticks towards 9 minutes past midday here in London, let's cross to hear from Monocle's Emma Searle. She's standing by with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Tom. Leading US defense officials have told a congressional committee that the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan can be traced back to a deal between the group and the Trump administration. The Doha Agreement was signed in February 2020 and set a date for the US to withdraw its troops. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said he is willing to restore a vital communication hotline with South Korea. He also accused the US of proposing talks without changing its hostile policy towards the North. Pyongyang severed the hotlines earlier this year. Access to an online museum which remembers the victims of China's 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown has been restricted in Hong Kong. The museum says the move is a disgraceful act to erase historical memory and has urged officials restore access to the site. And today's Monocle Minute reports that the Australian government has returned Queensland's Daintree rainforest, the world's oldest continually surviving tropical rainforest, to its previous Indigenous custodians. You can find out more by heading to monocle.com/minute. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. Now, Portugal leads a group of EU countries that have overtaken the likes of Israel and the UK in the COVID-19 vaccination race. Portugal's impressive programme has been spearheaded by a former submarine commander who's been praised across the country for his determination to tackle the virus head-on. Let's unpack this further with Monocle 24's own Carlota Rebelo, who's here. She originally hails from the Portuguese island of Madeira. Hello, Carlota.
Hi, Tom.
And our health and science correspondent and regular charter of all things pandemic-related, Dr. Chris Smith, is here. Good afternoon to you, Chris. Great to hear from you, as always. And Chris, maybe I'll throw this to you first of all. Portugal's doing pretty well. Is there a secret? Is it about having a sort of impressive leader, a military man at the helm? Can that sort of personality thing make a big difference here?
Well, that helps, but really it's a numbers thing, this. First and foremost, Portugal has a much smaller population than the UK, so that arguably is part of it. But this is not a race. It's all about making sure that people are safe. And what the UK did was to prioritise the protection of the most vulnerable people in society, who were the oldest people. They had the highest risk from coronavirus. But for some reason, we then stopped rolling out vaccines once we hit about age 18. Other countries, meanwhile, around the world were very busy vaccinating their youth, and we didn't make that decision until much more recently, when our JCVI batted the call back to the chief medical officers, who then said, well, actually, we think it's a good idea that we should vaccinate people between the ages of 12 and 15. Meanwhile, many other countries, many other European countries had already been doing that. And because those groups make up quite a big component of the population, it makes their numbers look artificially a lot better, because they vaccinated a higher fraction of the population. If you do it on adults over 18, then the UK is doing extremely well. And in fact, the fact that we're not seeing a translation of the very high case burden of the between 30 and 40,000 cases a day into people going into hospital and people unfortunately not making it out the other end, that's because we have protected the most vulnerable groups. So what we're seeing is a lot of cases and a lot of case transmission, which we're hoping will be further arrested by vaccination. But because we haven't yet vaccinated those younger people, and they make up a big chunk of the population, it makes our overall vaccination rate look like it's stalled and look less attractive.
And Carlota, let me bring you in here, because one of the key things that we've reflected on throughout the pandemic has been the degree to which the public adhere to recommendations, guidelines, and indeed follow the urgings of their central and local government in terms of participating in vaccine drives. And that's particularly important, as Chris says there, with, galvanising younger people to get involved. How would you characterise, conversations you have back home with people, the general enthusiasm for adherence amongst your fellow countrymen and women?
So I'll try to summarise the sentiment as much as I can. Overall, I feel like Portugal as a country, we're quite amenable to being told what vaccines to get. There's several compulsory vaccines that we need to get in order to enroll at certain schools, at university, to apply to certain jobs. So a lot of the trust in the health services exists already just by that sheer process. Now, when it comes to where we are now with COVID, I think Dr. Chris Smith there was trying to be very diplomatic in saying that a military man can help, but I think it was really crucial to have him on, because before that, Portugal had a hospital administrator in charge of the vaccination program. We were hit by the Delta variant quite harshly in January and February. Across the world, there were the images of the ambulances lined up outside Lisbon hospitals, particularly in the capital, where people sadly would not make it alive by the time their ambulance would reach the emergency room. So horrible images. That fear, to get paired up with replacing a hospital administrator by a military man to say, okay, this is how we're getting things done. And as Dr. Chris Smith was just saying, playing with that numbers game, how many vaccines do we need to deliver a day? Okay, how many volunteers do we need? Putting all of that together, I think, is what got us here. Portugal has around 10.3 million inhabitants, a small country. And at a point, we were administering nearly 160,000 vaccines a day. For a country of that size, that is a lot. Henrique Gouveia Melo, the general in charge of the vaccination program, was responsible for a network of over 300 pop-up vaccination centres. Nearly 5,000 doctors, countless nurses and even volunteers joined the network. A similar thing to what happened in the UK and in other countries, a call to people who had just recently retired, come back into the network to help during this time. And you put all of that together with an already predisposition to trust the authorities and health authorities, and the result is here to see. And there was a real push now before school started in September to get kids over the age of 12 vaccinated, so to avoid outbreaks in classrooms, etc.
Well, Chris, we've not spoken on this programme for, probably a couple of weeks now. And while we have you, I'm intrigued to pick your brain. We're into flu season. I faithfully went and got my flu jab already. Schools are back with gusto. And again, I'm sure other parents listening around the UK will know instances of COVID still on the increase. Do you have a sense yet for what the onset of regular flu season looks like against the backdrop of the pandemic? Are you expecting to see the kinds of peaks, perhaps not with the same consequences, but in terms of case numbers that we saw as we entered the winter last time around?
This week I spoke with Professor Ron Eccles, who actually set up the Cold Centre at Cardiff University and for about 3 decades spent time becoming one of the foremost authorities on the common cold. And what he told me is that we're seeing an epidemic of common colds across the UK now. Now, the flu will join the phalanxes of common colds and other respiratory infections that assail us this winter. In fact, in our laboratory this week, we've already detected at least one case of flu. We think that's probably an imported case because that's how most flu cases come into the country. But what the data on the common cold are telling us is that the 18 months we've had sitting on furlough, sitting in our living rooms, sitting on Zoom, and hopefully also tuning into Monocle, of course, is that we have lost our immunity, our baseline immunity to many of the common threats that assail us, including the flu. And this is basically laying the ground for a big surge this season. And that's why we're already seeing, as schools have gone back, a big increase in rhinoviruses and probably a big surge in flu to come, which is why the government are eager that as many people as possible do get a flu jab. But there might be a silver lining to this cloud because there was a hint of this last year that when people catch one virus, it puts the body into an antiviral state by putting all the defences up in all of your cells, and it makes it harder for you to catch other infections while you're infected with colds. So one speculation is that this big surge in rhinoviruses and RSV, which is also doing the rounds, and possibly also flu, will render us a bit less susceptible to COVID. And so as a result, that may be why we've seen the COVID case numbers stalling a bit as the schools have gone back, because we've had such a big surge in seasonal colds that it's chopped off COVID at the knees and stopped it spreading quite so well. It's a speculation, but it's a reasonable one.
And just to pick up on that point about the flu season, despite the fact that the vaccination task force in Portugal is now being dismantled because the government has said the General Henrique Gouveia Melo has reached his goal, and with getting over 80% of the population double jabbed, the vaccination centres that have been set up, the pop-up vaccination centres that he created, are going to remain in place until the end of the year and double up as flu vaccination points and COVID vaccination points. So I think this trend about, also encouraging people to get the flu jab if needed, which in Portugal hasn't really been a thing unless you're above the age of 70. There's really not a lot of advertising for it. I think now it's changing, and the fact that these vaccination centres are remaining open is a good thing.
Definitely a good thing. I don't know why you gestured at me when you said over the age of 70, Carlotta. Please, have some respect for your elders and betters. Carlotta Rebello and Dr. Chris Smith, always fabulous to speak to you, Chris. Thanks for your time. As always, you're listening to The Briefing here on Monocle 24.
Novartis is proud to partner The Briefing on Monocle 24. Novartis is a company that is committed to reimagining medicine. A global healthcare leader intent on changing the practice of medicine, Novartis has been exploring uncharted frontiers in science for more than a century. Organic solvents are as natural to chemistry as the ubiquitous test tubes. But the fossil origin of some widely used solvents, which are also used in drug development, are a threat to the environment. Special soap-like substances that can work like nanomachines might dissolve part of this toxic problem and help chemistry become more natural. Fabrice Gallou is an award-winning chemist who works as a principal fellow at the Chemical Analytical Development Unit at Novartis. Gallou understands, perhaps better than most, that chemistry is an old science and that many processes have stayed the same for decades. Changing them, even if this were to have a beneficial effect on the environment, is difficult not only technically, but also for cultural reasons. Nevertheless, change is at hand.
I'm Fabrice Calou. I'm a chemist in technical research development. I'm part of a team making medicines. My dream is to make these medicines in a radically different manner, utilizing the most sustainable resources that we have available to us. With the new technologies we recently discovered and implemented in our processes, we're able to not only make a difference for patients via access to the medicines, but also to the society.
Since joining Novartis in 2006, Calou has developed new ideas on how to improve some of the standard chemical processes used in drug development. He helped to launch the so-called Green Chemistry Group, which today encompasses a loose group who focus on establishing new process and synthesis protocols using new classes of solvents. Since the Green Chemistry team began its efforts, the group has worked on dozens of early-phase compounds, some of which are now in late-stage development. Just another of the ways in which Novartis is reimagining medicine.
You're back with the briefing on Monocle 24. I'm Tom Edwards. Let's get the latest business headlines now with Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Good afternoon to you, Ewan. And given what Fernando's going to be talking about, I should really ask you about bonds, the bond market. But instead, Ewan, we'll start with the inflation picture around Europe today.
Hello, Tom. Yeah, well, the two things do certainly tie in. Inflation and whether it is going to be stick around or whether it is just transitory is one of the key debates among not just investors but the world's central banks. It's really crucial for the future of monetary policy. Bit of an update today on inflation around Europe. Consumer prices in France are 2.7% higher than a year ago. In Italy, that number is now 3%. Both of those numbers at 10-year highs. Now, we're expecting them to go higher. In the UK, we think inflation could be as high as 4% by the end of the year. In what has been a very low inflation world, these are pretty high numbers. Now, these inflation numbers almost all down to increases in energy prices, up 14.5% in France, up more than 20% in Italy. But so far, the world's central bankers are playing down the significance of these surges in inflation. They do think it will be transitory. ECB President Christine Lagarde saying stronger inflation, largely transitory, and the Fed chair saying that there will be an end to these pressures when the reopening of the economy has fully finished. We don't know whether that's right or not, but that is certainly their best guess. There's no let-up in energy prices at the moment. One concern, one nasty word which has been rearing its head is stagflation, a nasty term from the 1970s, rising prices with slow or little economic growth. Now, so far, we are not anywhere near stagflation. Prices are rising and growth is starting to slow. But we had a bit of decent news on the UK economy growth front. GDP rising 5.5% in the second quarter. That was better than economists were expecting. And given the fuel crisis and a lot of the supply bottlenecks, I think it was a welcome surprise for lots of people.
Taking me back to my A-levels with talk of stagflation, Ewan, it makes me feel very old. I want to ask you a little bit about, there's all this talk, of course, about sustainability and sustainability themes, and it's given rise to this idea of greenwashing, companies who are talking a good game but maybe not actually delivering. And you've got briefly some news about a positive step in the fight against this so-called greenwashing.
Yeah, investing green is very much in vogue, as you say. Companies tracking their environmental, social and governance performance is a tricky thing to do, and the danger with greenwashing is that companies say they're doing stuff but actually behind the scenes they're really just kind of carrying on as usual. Well, now investors overseeing more than $4 trillion in investments are banding together to attempt to standardize data on the ESG performance of companies. It's being led by the California Public Employees Retirement System, a massive American pension fund, and a big private equity group called Carlyle. Now, they're going to be tracking and attempting to standardize data on greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy, board diversity, work-related injuries, and a whole host of other ESG metrics. The Carlyle chief executive told us that by honing in on a common set of standards and common metrics, we can start to standardize the conversations so we can really track progress. He says that's something which is impossible to do with the data they have at the moment. So an attempt to try and standardize some of these metrics.
Interesting stuff, Ewan. Thank you, as always, for your time. That was our friend Bloomberg's Ewan Potts joining us here on The Briefing. And as we tick towards the top of the programme, we're going to close with this. I've been expecting you, Mr. Pacheco. In case listeners, I mean, surely there can't be any who haven't got the hint. What is the chart on this week's Global Countdown, Fernando?
It's very rare that I do a special one here, Tom, but basically I decided to look at the top 5, not best songs from Bond, I have to say, according to the American charts. I have to use kind of, because I know this kind of lists cause controversy, you know, the Bond fans, they always have their favorites, because there are a lot of big names missing out. I mean, I'm not going to review because then otherwise you know that it's not going to be on the top 5. And I know you're a fan as well. I'm a big fan of James Bond. I think, Tom, I've watched all of them. All the 25 of them.
I'm not surprised, Fernando, that you've watched them all. I'm pretty sure most of them. Probably not in the right order. I can imagine you doing a kind of marathon sesh and trying to view them all back to back.
Exactly. I mean,
one for another day, perhaps?
If you live in the UK, to be honest, I mean, every weekend there's a Bond film on television. I mean, you wouldn't miss out, especially on ITV.
International listeners should check out ITV4.
Exactly.
Where apparently that's all that they broadcast.
Exactly.
Anyway, let's talk about the tunes, because there have been some absolute belters down the years. We're talking, 50, 60 years almost. But we should start this week's special Bond-themed countdown with the all-time US chart number 5 track.
And that's one that I think most people would know. It's, of course, Adele with Skyfall from the same film in 2012. And this one, Tom, I mean, won the Oscar for Best Song. It was, according to, music experts, one of the best Bond tracks in recent years. It's epic, dark, and moody. Shall we have a listen? I mean,
it's a big belting ballad, isn't it, from Adele? Are you a fan, Fernando, of that one?
I am a fan. It's not my favorite. I think it's quite a safe choice as well. But I think Skyfall, I think it matches very well with Skyfall, because Skyfall was the most profitable Bond as well, more than $1 billion at the box office. So of course they have to hire Adele, which is kind of the best-selling artist of the moment. Everything she releases, it becomes gold. In a way.
Very nice.
I'm trying to.
This is great.
I know you're very.
You need to do some scripting for some of these movies. Number 4, we are rolling the clock back. What? 3.5 decades, something of that order?
Kind of, 1981. This one, and it's an interesting choice, Tom, because this film, For Your Eyes Only, was the follow-up of Moonraker, which a lot of people hated Moonraker because Bond went to space and it was getting a bit too much.
It was pretty ridiculous.
It was pretty ridiculous, yeah. I mean, I quite enjoyed that film, but For Your Eyes Only is a more subdued, so they decided to choose a more seductive track as well. Very kind of, very sexual, but in a very light way. It's Sheena Easton with For Your Eyes Only, and after we play this clip, I'll tell you what's different about that track as well. Let's have a listen.
Sheena Easton there, and
Good
listeners,
track.
can I just reassure them, you did say you consider that to be lightly sexual.
Yeah, is it
only
not
lightly?
Only lightly,
not
yeah.
heavily sexual.
Not heavily sexual.
It's too early in the day for that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Sheena, do you like this one?
I like this one, and I think the producers liked her looks as well. She's one of the few artists that is actually singing in the opening sequence in the cinema. So, that's her face you see at the opening sequence, which again is quite mellow, and I think Roger Moore kind of is flying this kind of ocean in a way. It's very confusing. But anyway, she's one of the few that is actually in the film itself as well. Good song. A good nice track by Sheena.
Right, we're at the middle of the charts now. Fernando, can I slightly jump the gun on what is at number 3 by telling you that this is potentially, just on background, my favourite Bond film of them all?
Amazing. So very interesting pick, Tom. Very good one.
I know it's controversial.
It is a bit controversial because Live and Let Die, actually, from what I've been reading, I believe that was the first Roger Moore film as well. I
think so.
And it was not kind of this kind of rich villain. It was quite, he talked about drug trafficking, and it was in the middle of the blaxploitation era. So it's quite interesting, quite a diverse, the first African-American Bond girl as well. And the track, do you like the track as well? You told me you liked the film, but...
Well, context is everything. I like the track for the movie, regular listeners may know of my sort of antipathy towards the lead singer. This is in one of his even worse iterations, in my view. But tell us what it is, Fernando.
Let's have a listen. And number 3, we have Paul McCartney and Wings with Live and Let Die.
Say live and let die. Live and let die. Live and let die. Live and let die.
Oh, come on, that is an absolute stone-cold classic. It's been a while.
Tune, yeah. And I agree with you about Paul McCartney, but this one, I have to say, I really, really like it.
That is a zinger. I love it.
And number 2, Tom, I know you like kind of those little stats, because I'm going to say number 2 is Carly Simon for Nobody Does It Better. But of course, the title is Nobody Does It Better. I mean, there's no Bond film called like that.
And there's only a couple, I think, of tracks where this holds true.
Very few. I think before, the film is from 1977. Before that, only I think Dr. No had a track that was not the title of the film. It's from The Spy Who Loved Me. But in this track, she does mention the word The Spy Who Loved Me. So, I mean, it's not, that...
They're covering the bases. But I like these little kind of standouts, these outlier tracks. I mean, Carly Simon... bit of a legend. Nobody Does It Better? Does it tick the boxes for you, Fernando, before we hear it?
Very much so. I love a good power ballad. And Carly Simon, I mean, I think she's a very respected artist. Amazing classic songs as well. And the film is pretty good, actually. The Spy Who Loved Me got, I think, on Rotten Tomatoes, 80%, which is very good for a Bond film.
I'm slightly surprised by that, to be honest.
Exactly. So let's have a listen. I mean, the wonderful Carly Simon, Nobody Does It Better.
Keeping all my secrets safe tonight, and nobody does it better. Though sometimes I wish someone could.
So how many of these have Roger Moore in it?
To be honest, most of them. I mean, he really...
Oh, that's controversial as well, isn't it?
But I quite like Roger Moore.
Where does he stand in the Bond actor pantheon for you?
You know what? I think he's one of my favourites because, I mean, my kind of Bond experiences started with him. Not with Sean Connery, not with Pierce Brosnan. The first films I watched were Roger Moore, and I quite like that he's kind of funny and camp in a way, which that's what I associate.
They were more fun.
Exactly.
And apparently, I don't know if this is correct or apocryphal, but Ian Fleming wanted Roger Moore from the get-go. Is that true? Anyone behind me? Nobody knows.
Actually,
Nobody knows. I think that is true.
I have a question. Don't you think Roger Moore is a blonde guy, right? I mean, why people say that Daniel Craig was the first blonde?
Well, he's kind of
slightly darker,
yeah.
A bit controversial, but anyway, I was just wondering about that.
Bit of a legend, Roger Moore. Right, now, we've had classic singers, Carly Simon, people maybe better known for other things, but indisputably great songwriters, Paul McCartney. We've had Adele from the contemporary canon. Our listeners will be thinking, what can be at number one? And they probably fall into a trap of thinking it's one of the old favourites, but they'd be wrong.
They will be wrong, and this is actually a controversial number one, I have to say. I love it, but I know there are people that hate it. In fact, there are a lot of people, Bond fans, that don't like this film at all. Actually, it was panned by the critics, but it was incredibly successful commercially. And I mean, just look at the band they chose, Duran Duran, at their peak, kind of new wave. And okay, the track is a bit silly, but I like it. I like a bit silly. And I do like A View to a Kill as a film as well. The critics might disagree with me, but I don't care.
I think we should listen to it. This is Duran Duran. We're right slap bang in the middle of the haze of the 80s. Let's take a listen.
Amazing. And the film, do you remember Christopher Walken, Grace Jones? There was some fun elements.
There were some iconic
film.
Moments.
Yeah. And
maybe not in a good way. I don't know.
the only number one Bond song in the US as well, I have to say. Funnily enough, not number one here in the UK. It was 3 weeks and number two just behind Paul Hardcastle 19, the very iconic track.
Yeah.
So just a little trivia.
God, there was a lot of synth happening. And
exactly.
I feel obligated to point out, as this has been written into the very script, the fabric of today's programme, that our producer Rhys James wants it known to all and sundry that he's appalled that Shirley Bassey, I don't know why, what is his tie to Shirley Bassey? Could it be something to do with nationhood? I don't know. Neither Diamonds Are Forever nor Goldfinger make the top five. He's outraged. Are you outraged, Fernando?
mildly outraged. I mean, but I have to say, I mean, she's amazing, Shirley Bassey. But we have to stick to the facts. I mean, Diamonds Are Forever only charted like number 38, actually. So, it looks beautiful in the film, but perhaps people are not actually listening. Even Madonna's not here. You know that I'm a big Madonna fan.
I cannot believe you didn't concoct a top 5 Bond themes that in some way had Madonna featuring.
She's not there, but she's amazing. Even Sam Smith is not here as well. So kind of a lot of big names. Louis Armstrong. My God, there's so much. Maybe I have to do a second one. A Bond number 2.
I'm just hearing the audience definitely do not want to have a second one, Fernando.
No, we're back to normal next.
Lovely stuff, Faye. That was great fun. Thank you very much indeed for guiding us through the top 5 US Bond tracks. And people should check out Monocle and Culture, Fernando, shouldn't they, this week? A Bond special. Pretty good show.
I spoke to the director and to the producers of the film, No Time to Die.
There you go. Go and check it out. That is all, though, we have time for on today's edition of The Briefing, which was produced by the very angry Rhys James and also by Emma Searle. Our researcher was Sophie Monaghan-Coombs. Our studio manager was Chris Blackwell. My thanks to them, one and all. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. That's noon in London, 1300 if you're listening on CET. My name is Tom Edwards. Goodbye and thank you for listening.